Hi, today I'd like to talk about Kant's aesthetics in the critique of judgment. This book has a special place in my heart because it's probably the first philosophical work I seriously read. I got it in the summer between 8th grade and 9th grade at the library because it was the first book that I saw in the philosophical section whose name I recognized, except Hegel, and I flipped through that and it was too hard. Kant was also hard, but it had a leaf on the cover. And I read it slowly through the course of the early 9th grade, and it probably permanently occupies a space in my mind. I'm excited to share my thoughts on it, so let's get into it. This lecture focuses, well, it's not really a lecture, this video, focuses only on Kant's aesthetics, the critique of aesthetic judgment, leaving aside the teleological chapter because I don't like it, and I've spent much more time thinking about and learning about the aesthetical chapter rather than the teleological one, which was boring. I love the former chapter though, so let's get into it. Section 1. This isn't section 1 in the book, this is my own section 1. The judgment of taste and disinterested pleasure. So first, Kant begins by defining a judgment of taste as an aesthetic rather than a cognitive judgment. What that means is that we aren't learning about the object or using our knowledge to identify the object when we have an aesthetic impulse, but we simply feel a certain pleasure, that is, beauty. In other words, when we say this painting is beautiful, we are not applying a concept to know the object, but we're referring to our own feeling of pleasure. These judgments add nothing to our own knowledge. They merely compare a given representation with our state of mind. Our judgments of taste are aesthetic, not cognitive. He explains this further by showing when we have an aesthetic judgment of an object, such as if I say this painting is this cloud is beautiful, I'm comprehending it in one stream, one instant aesthetic judgment of taste. I'm not logically coming to the conclusion that it is beautiful cognitively by saying because of the colors it has, because of the form it has, because of the space it occupies, this cloud is beautiful. I'm not condensing multiple streams. I'm having one singular stream. But he says that from that stream, we can split it logically into multiple factors. So first I could feel this mountain is beautiful, and then I could explain to my friend that it is beautiful because it has this shape, because it has this proportion, because it has this color. Next, a central requirement of Kant's aesthetic judgment is disinterest. The pleasure must be pure and free from any desire for the object. Kant writes in his section 2. Now, where the question is whether something is beautiful, we do not want to know whether we are concerned in the real existence of the thing, but rather we estimate what estimate we form of it on mere contemplation. Here he goes on and on about how fine, beautiful things don't matter if you only want the practicality. I don't care about the beauty of my tent. I just care that it works as a tent if I'm going to survive in the wild. Then he writes, all one wants to know is whether the mere representation of the object is to my liking, no matter how indifferent I may be to the real existence of the object of this representation. So a judgment of taste depends only on satisfaction in the representation itself, not on any practical interest. So one of Kant's most famous points is that taste must be unbiased by personal desire or utility. The existence of the object is irrelevant to the judgment. The aesthetic judgment must concern itself only with form, like shape or arrangement or proportion or rhythm in the object presented, not ideas we detect with the senses, like color or timbre, since the latter has a deep connection to the agreeable and thus to interest. He goes on to explain what the agreeable means later. If you want to look at it with a mind-body dualism, he wants to be rid of the body in this judgment, which has the senses, and keep only the mind or the soul, which has a pure and holy understanding of the world if you think the soul comes from God. Plato would say that the body is a hindrance to the soul's pursuit of truth, and Kant agrees for beauty. The senses are used as a means, not an ends to the judgment. So when Kant says that beauty comes from the way something looks, even if it doesn't serve a purpose per se. Thus, unlike the merely agreeable, which gratifies personal desire, the beautiful is experienced with a free and disinterested pleasure. Kant contrasts the three basic reactions to objects, the agreeable, the beautiful, and the good, noting that we approve the agreeable only for ourselves, but we claim that the beautiful pleases everyone. We shouldn't let the other two, the good or agreeable, impact our judgment of aesthetics. So to summarize all of this, A judgment of taste is aesthetic, not cognitive, based on a disinterested pleasure in the representation of the object itself. 2. Second, subjective universality and communicability. Kant's subjective universality is my favorite part of this section. Although judgments of taste are subjective, Kant argued they should claim a kind of universality. When we claim things about beautiful objects, we usually say, "This mountain is beautiful," rather than, "This mountain is beautiful to me," which shows we claim that beauty is universal. Kant explains that from our sense of disinterested satisfaction, beauty, we infer that the ground of pleasure is common to everyone. In other words, because our pleasure does not depend on any private need or concept, we assume others could share it, and so we speak as if beauty were objective. We claim universality. If I judge a building to be beautiful, for example, I say, "This building is beautiful." Kant claims that we don't say, "It's beautiful to me." I implicitly demand universality in the name of taste, and we deny taste to people who don't agree with us. Kant recognizes this is a bit paradoxical. How can a merely subjective feeling claim universal validity? His answer is the idea of a common sense of taste, arguing that our aesthetic faculty has a shared a priori basis in human cognition. In Kant's theory, the imagination and understanding harmonize in aesthetic experience, and this harmonious play is something humans universally possess. The equality and balance of the animal and rational. Because we all cognize things in the same way, Kant links the universality of judgments of taste to our shared cognitive structures, that being sensibility and understanding, and such. In the critique of judgment, he calls the principle of taste common sense, not meaning things everyone knows, but meaning the shared faculty that makes taste possible. Because the beautiful involves the same cognitive powers as normal experience, that is, we understand beauty with our eyes and ears the same way we understand non-beauty. One might argue that they will have the same universal validity as ordinary cognition. That is, just as I understand this book to be a book, this phone to be a phone, this building to be a building, you should understand this mountain to be beautiful. They both use the sense of sight, so it only follows, right? This is the argument. Kant asserts that aesthetic judgment rests on this common agreement of human faculties, which is why we can demand others assent and deny them taste if they don't agree with us. Now, in summary, despite being subjective, an individual's judgment of beauty claims universality because our judgment of objects are usually universal. Next, Kant asserts that our imagination and understanding achieve harmony when judging the beautiful. Imagination and understanding. Section 4. Distinguishing the agreeable, the good, and the beautiful. This is my second favorite section by Kant. Here, he differentiates the agreeable, the good, and the beautiful. The agreeable simply pleases the senses or satisfies a desire. Food tastes good, clothes are comfortable. Pleasure like this is always tied to interest, so it interferes with our judgment of beauty, as you remember. If an object is just agreeable, we enjoy it only insofar as it suits our taste or desire, and we can say it is pleasant to me. For example, a person in the desert and a person in the Arctic will react to drinking a hot cocoa differently. This is what it means when we say that an agreeable object is enjoyed only insofar as it suits our desire. This is different from our judgment of the beautiful, because beauty goes beyond private satisfaction. If the hot cocoa is arranged in a pleasing pattern, both the desert and the Arctic fellows will enjoy the sight of it. By contrast, a judgment of the good is governed by moral or practical purposes and has a determinate purpose, such as happiness or morality. The good's universality is based on rational law, not feeling. Kant notes that judgments about the good are conceptual and assert universal validity for everyone, but they do so via concepts of ends. As in, Kant notes that the good requires there to be a goal. The reason honesty is good in civilization is because it works to a common goal. Honesty would not be good if it didn't lead to any goal. Now, if I am dishonest, that also leads to a goal, anarchy. That is why dishonesty is good for the anarchist, but bad for the civilian. It works towards a purpose for the anarchist. It works against the purpose of the civilian. There's a little bit of moral relativism cheekily coming through here, but in any case, this sets the good apart from both the beautiful and the agreeable, the fact that it has a goal. Good, by the same token, must be universal by the person claiming it is good. Consider how honesty is good, is true or false, depending if you're a civilian or an anarchist. The moral relativist, though, could claim honesty is good for me, though this is generally absurd if you aren't and you claim moral absolutism. Of course, the Abraham of God is the ultimate good, because everything he does is useful and leads towards a good. This could shed some light on the significance of the Christian God's reviving of Jesus. To summarize, the agreeable pleases us with interest, and we understand its subjectivity. The good pleases our reason by its concept and claims universal validity through a rational principle, either moral or practical. The beauty pleases us disinterestedly and is claimed as universal pleasure, though it doesn't have to be. Section 5. The role of genius in aesthetic ideas. In the second half of the critique, Kant extends his theory to art. He distinguishes between free beauty and adherent beauty. Free beauty is attached and reliant on no concept, and adherent beauty must adhere to a concept. For example, a cloud is beautiful freely just because of its form. It doesn't depend on what it is. This is opposed to adherent beauty, which is beauty in reference to a concept. As an example, a well-designed chair is beautiful because it fits well with what it ought to be or does. A well-built horse is beautiful because it fits well with what it ought to be or does. I hope that makes sense. Kant then introduces the notion of genius. In section 46, he says, quote, "The innate mental aptitude through which nature gives the rule to art," unquote. That is, a genius has an intimate understanding of nature, which they can apply to create a beautiful art, because of course beauty is reliant on certain proportions, which are especially found in nature. An artist with genius can create beauty without relying on fixed rules or formulas. This is what the great modern artists were doing. Kant notes that a genius, quote, "has the innate aptitude through which the artist produces what cannot be explained by any rule, and yet is exemplary in its beauty. Hence the artist need not consciously follow any rule," unquote. Basically, a genius has an innate connection with beauty, which does not need to be chained down by rules, besides, of course, the rules of the medium. The genius must still know their way around the paintbrush, for example, or the English language. I have some theories extending from this, and I hope you'll care to watch them in future videos. Thus, for Kant, art depends ultimately on genius, not on rules. Kant wouldn't care for the golden ratio. By contrast, Newton, a brilliant scientist, is not a genius in Kant's sense because he explained his reasoning step by step and came to his conclusions logically through observation, slowly and step by step. However, some of the Hindu Brahmins who meditated and came to profound scientific ideas just from meditation are true geniuses in the Kantian sense, because they came to that conclusion in a single blast of knowledge, not confined by rules. Kant would not himself claim to be a genius because he logically, slowly, a priori worked out his arguments. However, the Prophet Muhammad would be a genius because he theoretically received his divine ideas in a single burst of knowledge from God. Kant also speaks of aesthetic ideas. He defines an aesthetic idea as a representation of the imagination, which induces much thought, without, however, any definite thought, i.e., any concept being adequate to it, unquote. In more simple English, it's an idea created by the imagination that makes us think a lot, but we can't fully explain it with a clear concept. Such ideas are counterparts to rational ideas, like moral or religious ideas, that cannot be fully depicted. Kant says that a work of art aims to express those aesthetic ideas, giving form to a rational idea to make visible the invisible, such as Ravel's description of the ocean in Mirrors 3, Toby Fox's depiction of the underground in Undertale, or the Chrysler Building's depiction of the car in Architecture. Kant's example is the poet's depiction of heaven or hell, making the invisible visible. Very lengthy, and he goes on and on. This is giving form to a rational idea. The genius succeeds when it incarnates these boundless ideas in a determinate form. This is what abstract artists try to do in an even more transcendent way. Jack Kerouac is a genius because he tries to imply a feeling naturally. If you read through his 30 tips of writing, you see that he was trying to connect with what was natural and deep and come out with a perfectly book in the rhythm of what he was writing, in the rhythm of 50s America. In summary, genius is a natural talent through which nature gives the rule to art, the art rule of proportion especially. Genius has no need for rules. A problem in modern writing especially is that everyone wants to break rules without being a genius, and ends up being awful art, like how contemporary classical music often throws in contemporary orchestral music often throws in strange and grotesque sound effects or arrhythmic passages without knowing why they're doing it, and only doing it because they feel like it. They do it without actually feeling an intimate need to. They are not true geniuses. Aesthetic ideas, though, are notions that hint at rational ideas, but can't be explained by captured by concepts. Art expresses aesthetic ideas by giving form to thought-provoking notions and ideas. These aspects show that for Kant, art and nature are unified under beauty. Natural beauty and fine art both engage in aesthetic judgment. He implies that nature and fine art rely on the same ideas. The key is that both can give rise to aesthetic ideas and profound pleasure. I personally believe that nature determines the beauty of everything else. We are animal before we are rational. 6. The sublime, mathematic and dynamic. Finally, Kant's aesthetics address the sublime, which is a distinct aesthetic feeling. For Kant, the sublime is not a property of objects, but an experience in the mind, like beauty. He distinguishes two kinds. There is the mathematical sublime, which where when we are confronted with something of overwhelming magnitude, such as a vast mountain or starry skies, our imagination fails to grasp it, yet reason demands a whole. This struggle awakens a feeling of our supersensible rational faculty. Supersensible means beyond our senses, supersensible. As he puts it, encountering something so immense that we cannot measure it triggers a, quote, striving to advance to the infinite. The inadequacy of our faculty, imagination, for estimating the magnitude awakens the feeling of a supersensible faculty in us, unquote. We feel our mind's power to think of the infinite surpasses the limited capacity of sense. We try to comprehend the infinite and make it finite, but we can't. And then there is the dynamical sublime. Confronted with overwhelming might, such as natural disasters or perhaps the atomic bomb, we feel our physical powerlessness, but also simultaneously realize our spiritual freedom, and we go from flesh to our reason and mind. Very stoic. In these moments, the, quote, irresistibility of nature's power certainly makes us, considered as natural beings, recognize our own physical powerlessness, but at the same time it reveals a capacity for judging ourselves as independent of nature and a superiority over nature, whereby the humanity in our person remains undemeaned even though the human being must submit to that dominion. The storm or volcano frightens us, yet because we remain safe observers, the experience affirms our own inner strength. In both cases, the emotion of the sublime contains mixed feelings. Kant notes that there is pleasure in realizing our reason's superiority to nature in the dynamical, together with an element of displeasure. When we see the colossal, there may initially be some shock or fear, for our imagination is inadequate to comprehend it. This is followed by admiration and delight in our mind's freedom. Kant describes these alternations as a negative pleasure, a pleasure derived from displeasure to some extent. Thus, judgments of beauty are different than that of the sublime, because a judgment of the sublime is unharmonious. It is vague and overwhelming, rather than the harmonious beauty. The beautiful is found in objects with form and limits, and comes from harmony of nature and harmony of reason and imagination. The sublime, however, is evoked by what is formless or boundless. It may be in nature's vastness or might. It may be in thinking about infinity. The feeling of the sublime arises only indirectly from the check or tension in our powers and the resultant exhilaration. Furthermore, we do not ascribe sublimity to objects themselves. Kant insists it is a property only in our mind. He claims it is incorrect to claim a tornado is sublime. Rather, such objects are simply fit to produce sublimity. He may agree with formatting the sentence, "I felt sublimity when I saw the tornado." Kant argues that the sublime has no specific representation in nature. It only appears in our mental attitude, for example, thinking of infinity. If you think about infinity right now and you think about it deeply and meditate on it, you will feel sublimity. It is not reliant on nature or nature's proportions. It is only a mental institution. Thus, in Kant's theory, it is appropriate to assign beauty to objects, but the sublime resides in our own mental experience. Conclusion. So to summarize the entire thing, Kant's critique of aesthetic judgment argues that judgments of beauty are subjective, but also claim universal validity. We expect others to agree when we say that something is beautiful. For Kant, beauty is not just about the object's purpose or function, but about the form, the way it appears to us as if it had a purpose without actually having one, purposiveness without purpose. He distinguishes free beauty, which is pure like a flower or an abstract form, from adherent beauty, tied to concepts like the beauty of a horse or a building. The pleasure we feel in beauty comes from a harmony between imagination and understanding, where the mind plays freely without being constrained by concepts. Kant also introduces aesthetic ideas, which are imaginative representations that suggest more than can be grasped by concepts, pointing to the sublime and to ideas of morality or the supersensible. That's all. Thanks for listening.